For me, a workplace where we are taking care of our employee well-being is one where we are giving people the space to be who they are, and we are allowing them the space to bring whatever they're going through in life, emotionally, mentally, to the workplace. And that I think is very important, because often we tend to believe that a great workplace which takes care of its employee well-being is a happy workplace, where everyone is happy and they're laughing and they're doing high fives in the aisles of the office, right? That may happen sometimes, but that to me is not a true reflection of a place which is giving employees the space. It's very hard. Like, all of us are very good at reading people, and we are very good at picking up people's mood around us, and we have this sixth sense. We're very perceptive, but nobody picked it up, and you realize it's very hard to know what's going on inside our minds and our hearts.
I remember even when I was at IIT, I lost a friend of mine to suicide, and it was very, very difficult, right? Till this day, I question. Right? In fact, we started your those books with that, saying, what is that we could have done differently to save her? I still remember that day, you're like 18, 19-year-old, and you're exposed to something like this. And
even till now, you realize, a lot of times you can feel lonely, and you can feel it's all about you, and choices you make are your choices to make, but they're not. Then if I take care of my employees in the best way possible, my shareholders will be taken care of.
One thing that we see, especially when parents have achieved a lot,
Correct.
right? Parents went to this IIT and IIM and there's a lot of pressure on the child, because there's right from the time they are growing up, there is a comparison ki utna to karna hi hai.
Correct.
That can sometimes just weigh you down as well, right? So as a parent, maybe one of the best things that we could do is giving that security ki hum hain, we have your back no matter what.
Very excited to be part of the Building Caring Companies podcast by your dost. I think these conversations are very important, so looking forward to participating in them and also hearing from my peers on their experiences on this topic.
Hi Mayank.
Hi Richa.
Welcome to our podcast of Building Caring Companies. Super excited to have you, Mayank.
Very, very happy to be here as well.
So just for our audience to know, I have Mayank here with me. Mayank is an IIT Kanpur alumnus, went to IIM Lucknow, many years at McKinsey in India and Amsterdam. From there to actually took a very different turn of working with Vani, and then to startups like Jibong. So much you've done, and now co-founded Aibo. Super excited to have you here, Mayank, and really want to learn about your journey.
Happy to be here and happy to share whatever I can.
So Mayank, I'm very excited. I heard, I know we were talking earlier.
Right.
You grew up in Lucknow.
Correct.
I want to understand how the childhood was for you. How did it really shape you?
Yeah, so I think I came from a typical middle class family of India. My dad was a government servant, moved around a bit within UP, and then pretty much settled in Lucknow for the large part of my school life. Youngest of three siblings. My sister is 12 years elder to me. My brother is 10 years elder. So in a good way, they were always role models and, kind of quasi parents when siblings are so much older. In sometimes a little bad way, they can take advantage of you when you're so younger. But overall, it was, I think, a happy childhood. I think one person who did play a very important role has been my mom. So she started her life as a normal homemaker, and she was there, and somewhere around 1990 she started her own boutique, and it was typically one kind of a tailor sitting out of our terrace, and then slowly growing into a garage, and then she opened a shop, and she's maintained it to this day. Wow. Right, it's been almost now 35 years, and obviously it's a small business run by one person. It's gone through a lot of ups and downs. But when I look back and as I've looked through this journey, her resilience and just, sticking on to something that gave her a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, and not letting go of it when that was the easiest thing to do so many times in this journey of 35 years. And even today, when I see, she's in her late 70s now, but that is such an important part of her identity.
And I think from Lucknow, studying in a school for so many years, and
Yes.
then and at a school with legacy. I want to talk about that. I think I found that
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. So I spend most of my school up to my 12th in Lamatnia, Lucknow, and that's a school which is about 179 years old right now. A lot of heritage and obviously when you are a kid growing up, you don't realize these things. But when I look back now, very important things that studying Lamatnia, one is this whole sense of heritage and you belong to something bigger than yourself. At that point, it was also a matter of pride, being it's like a tourist destination, the school building. But now there's a lot of this thing that the way you behave and the way you carry yourself, you are representing an institution. So that was kind of drilled into us early on. And apart from that, obviously, I think for many of us, the friends you pick up in school still end up being some far closer. So that's one of the things which I also took from Lamatnia. That I think that a small cohort of friends, which even today probably are my go-to people in terms of people I can talk to, even after all these years.
And from there, you went to IIT Kanpur.
Yes, next door.
Next door, yes.
IIT Kanpur was again amazing journey and not something which I planned, but yes, it was part because my brother had been to IIT Kanpur as well, so it was one of those things which you just follow in. And IIT Kanpur was amazing. When I look back, I feel I was so productive, in those times, and right now I reflect like how I was able to do so much in those times. Academic, sports, theater, other stuff. So overall, fun times. I really enjoyed. But one thing which I think IIT Kanpur added to my life was the time I spent in the counseling service of IIT Kanpur. So there's a cell called Student Counseling Service, which essentially is kind of like your dost in IIT Kanpur to just help students, give them support in times of any kind of need and anything they want to talk about if they're stressed out. And I just joined it as one of the things you join, among other things.
99.
In 99, yeah. So in my, and again, you can join from second year of engineering.
Yeah.
The motivation to join it because I actually got help when I was in first year.
That's
I looked at some of these students, who were counselors, and I realized, they were kind of these silent, this was not one of those cells or committees which was very visible and very loud on the campus. But they would always be there, always, whenever you meet them, they'll be asking how you're doing. So I became a student counselor in second year and then pretty much continued for my rest of the 3 years. And a couple of things, which are very unique for me at that time in student counseling service. So one, we used to have this practice where once a week, on Wednesdays, we used to call a psychiatrist on campus, right? And then, it would be in a guest house, so, kind of a location people are not aware of. But anybody could take an appointment by reaching out to the counseling service to come and meet the psychiatrist, right? And it was done in a very thoughtful way, so it wasn't advertised too much. And obviously, it was kept very confidential who's coming and meeting. And when I first took up the management of that program, I felt who would be coming. Like, I was still like, maybe, some really a few people will come, or people who are very stressed or, who are visibly needing help would turn up. And very quickly I realized a couple of things. One, there were quite a few people who were reaching out, which was great. Second, it was all students, right? There were so many like me who were reaching out. And clearly you couldn't pick them up in general in the hostels and stuff. And that to me was first realization of how important it is to have somebody to talk to and people to spend 2 hours, 3 hours with the counselor at times, and some were coming regularly, some would come one off, and how important it is to have. So that was one of the big takeaways for me.
Yeah, and you know what? You're talking about 99 and
Correct.
2000, right? In 2024 also, we work with a lot of
Correct.
colleges, and when we go to them and we say, of course, online is there, but if should we
Right.
have somebody visiting premises, lot of institutes say, हमारे बच्चों को जरूरत नहीं है, right? Even at that time, there were people, and the stigma is just getting better now. Still, so many
And
people.
it was a lot, and therefore a lot of focus was on confidentiality, like you have registers where you carried the name, and that was the responsibility of the counselor to keep it extremely safe and never make sure nobody gets to see it and stuff, because that was the premise of the program being successful.
Yeah.
That people had confidence, and a lot of it was spread through word of mouth, right? Well, people will know it, but we were very careful not to make it so visible that people are it becomes something people are aware of, and they're coming and checking who is going right? So that was, I think, a huge influence on my life, the 3 years of counseling service I did.
What were some of your observations there?
I think the biggest observation, and which was kind of linked to a very unfortunate incident where one of the students, and this was when I was in my fourth year of engineering, so kind of co-leading the overall service. Uh, Unfortunately, one of our students took his own life, and that was a moment in life which firstly was completely unexpected for me, and being in that place in counseling, I got to see it very closely. And 5 minutes before he did it, he was in the canteen laughing with his friends, and that was this kind of realization that it's very hard. Like, all of us feel we are very good at reading people, and we are very good at picking up people's mood around us, and we have this sixth sense, we are very perceptive, but nobody picked it up, and you realize it's very hard to know what's going on inside our minds and our hearts.
Yeah.
And we can't assume just by looking at people around us that oh, people don't need help, or at looking in the mirror, I don't need help. So I think that was the biggest realization, that you can't, and I spent a lot of time trying to ask myself as a counseling service member that what an indication. We talk to their friends, and was there something we could have done, because in some ways we felt the responsibility of not intervening. And really, yeah, I mean, there's nothing, yeah, that we could. So that was one big thing, that it's hard to know what's going on, and it requires a lot of constant effort uh, to make sure that we are connected to people around us. And the other thing which I picked up as well, and which in a way has impacted me personally as well, I also saw what his family went through. Most that, right? From a very small town, like, he was the hope of his entire village, who had been there, and I had to spend time with his family and extended family, and I realized, how much it impacted them, the tragedy itself. And that also kind of makes you realize, a lot of times it's not only about yourself. So that's something which I keep reflecting on, and it stayed with me. It's one of those things you internalize. Even till now, you realize a lot of times you can feel lonely, and you can feel it's all about you, and choices you make are your choices to make, but they're not. So that is the other thing I personally took up.
Yeah, I remember even when I was at IIT, I lost a friend of mine to suicide,
Yeah.
and it was very, very difficult, right? Till this day, I question, right? In fact, we started yours because of that, saying, what is that we could have done differently to save her? I still remember that day, you're like 18, 19-year-old, and you're exposed to something like this, and you just don't know how to handle it. Thank you for sharing. Meg, I also want to understand, you went to McKinsey, right?
Right.
McKinsey has such high talent density. I think we all know that, right? Like, the best of the best will go to McKinsey. But we also keep hearing about a lot of unfortunate incidents about organizations such as McKinsey, maybe not, but various organizations, right? I want to understand where there are people with such high talent density, such good IQ. Like, what are those things that could be trigger? Are there certain observation, reflections?
Yeah, I think two things. One, obviously, as you said, I think unfortunate incidents or work stress is actually everywhere. It's not one organization or one place, it's everywhere. I think somewhere there is still a very strong subconscious conscious bias we have in society that if people are, more successful, doing better in their careers, or earning good money, or what are other social symbols of success, there should be a negative correlation to mental stress, or a positive correlation to mental well-being. But I think whether examples, of any of these kind or any kind of studies ever done clearly show the correlation is very, very weak. There's absolutely no correlation. There is, I think, all studies done on happiness and money show that there is one threshold till which time actually even money helps because your basic sustenance and needs in life, and beyond it there is zero correlation between how you're doing. And again, I think to me it is very individual, and it is a lot of the organization cultures at times, but it's not correlated to the talent density or where people are coming from. And in fact, when obviously where you have high talent density, some incidents may get more visibility, whether it is IITs or it is quota coaching centers, or it is organizations which are supposed to be great. But I think it's everywhere. I think the first realization of society is we can't box it saying this needs more help or that needs more help, and it's all of us. The other thing which I realize is a lot of times, even today with all the progress on being more accepting of mental well-being, it is still something we want to do for others. Right? It is not like I don't need help, I'm good.
Yes.
But I want to help others, right? So it's like personally speaking, on those 3 years of counseling service, I never met the psychiatrist. It was right there, right? There were times when there were empty slots. I could just walk in and talk, but I never felt the need to go and talk, even though I could see all the benefits. And similarly, and same thing I think in organizations, we always still feel there is such a high thing about how strong you are has a correlation of whether you need to talk somebody about your mental well-being. So I think coming back to the question around McKinsey, I think McKinsey is like any other place, and what sometimes can happen, and so the higher the talent density, the higher the expectations you have from yourself and others have from you. So we used to use a term at times called insecure overachievers, right? Which is that people are doing so well in life, but the more well you do, the more you expect from yourself, and that can create a stress of itself. But again, having spent time in multiple organizations, I never felt that McKinsey was different from any other organization. I've been in my own startups, other multinationals. I think everywhere because the context is not always about work. I think as a human, we try and draw boundaries, but it's one life, right? And your boundaries, there's no such hard boundary in how you spend your time, right? So it's that, right? And just being aware, and not going with the bias saying they should not, like we don't need help here or they need help there only, is sometimes what blindsides us.
The term you use, insecure overachievers, right? I think something that we've seen in a lot of places, something that I could also correlate. So we at Yodos, we work with a lot of institutes which are very premier in nature. We work with organizations which have very high talent density, right? And then there are other organizations and other institutions as well. But something like self-esteem, saying I'm good enough, right? This comes very high from these premier institutions as well as organizations. One of the highest, right? That always have to prove to myself and to others that I'm better, right? And sometimes that could just like bog you down with so much happening.
It is. I think as a parent, now that I'm a parent, that is one of the things I'm most conscious. We talk about, and obviously as a parent, you constantly think about what values you're giving your kids, and and in the changing world, what do you want them for, and I realize there's a lot of things you want to teach our kids. You want to give them a sense of purpose in life, right? What are you working towards? It's linked to ambition and drive. You want to give them a sense of resilience, to grit it out and go through tough times. But for me, what I've increasingly realized through my own life, and which I try and make an effort with my kids now, is the more important than anything else is to give them a sense of security, right? And at times it may feel that the sense of security conflicts with, sense of purpose or sense of resilience, because you might be, making them a bit easy on life. But having that sense of security about who they are and their lives are decent and they are okay the way they are is very, very important, because I think, especially today, the rest of the world is busy making them insecure.
Yeah.
So that counterbalance is very few, right? Other than close family and friends who can give you a sense of security. That I think is so important. At least for me as a parent, that's what I have started, being more deliberate about. While obviously you want to do 10 things for your kids.
Yeah, but I think very good point you picked up, Mayank. In fact, one thing that we see, especially when parents have achieved a lot,
Correct.
right? Parents are into the society, and I am invested. There's a lot of pressure on the child because there's a like right from the time they are growing up, there is a comparison कि उतना तो करना ही है.
Correct.
I'm sure you would have that with your brother as well.
Correct.
कि भाई वहाँ गए, तुमको भी तो जाना ही है, right? And that can sometimes just weigh you down as well, right? So as a parent, maybe one of the best things that we could do is giving that security कि हम हैं, we have your back no matter what, right? But I also want to that you spoke about this and so beautifully. What I also want to understand. You have two children, beautiful children. And let's say if you were to imagine, right, like a world that you want for your children when they grow up, what do you think of that world as?
I think obviously as a parent, it's almost like a fairy tale world you'd want with your kids, which is, very fair, very just, fair, which is caring, which is empathetic. But I think the way I look at my, kids is almost like saying, I want to bring them up in a way that it doesn't matter what the world is, because that's something you cannot control, right? And that's why they're going back to the sense of security is how much your sense of self drives who you are, how much is your own judgment of what you do, and how good or bad or where you need to improve, and how you balance the judgment that society puts on you. Because I think the more externally influenced you are, the more are the chances your well-being depends on how good the world is, right? Which I cannot control, and in some ways I'm paranoid about the kind of world they may grow up in. So the more I can work on their inner self and give them the sense of security that life will figure itself out. Issues are not as big as they seem when it's happening. All of us have gone through, and you live to see another day. That I think is more important as a parent, rather than again, preparing them for a particular kind of world. I think today even preparing them for a certain kind of jobs is tough. You don't know the kind of skills they need. So I think that is how I approach it. So let's make sure our kids are secure, have a fair opinion of who they are, and can balance with all the signals society is giving them, rather than be too externally focused.
If we were to say, let me just ask you this, right? What kind of organization should there be when your children grow up? What kind of organization you visualize that you would want them to work in?
I think the organizations, to me, again, which I hope my kids, grow into, and which are more and more, are one where people realize that, employee well-being and employee happiness is probably the greatest insurance you have against the long-term health of the organization, right? And that's something which more and more organizations realize today, right? So it's almost, when we think about it, even as a capitalist myself who is trying to build, entrepreneurial ventures, it's almost the pyramid works upside down, that if I take care of my customers in the best way possible, then if I take care of my employees in the best way possible, my shareholders will be taken care of, right? I'll create the most shareholder value if I do the best for my customers and employees rather than the other way around, right? So I think as an organization, I hope they are part of organizations which are cognizant of this. Secondly, an organization which doesn't require them to be people very different from who they are when they're not at the workplace. So that's my again personal belief that see, each organization has a culture, each organization has their own values, and as humans we have our own personal values, and it's quite feasible and it should be that they may not always align. So finding as a person finding organizations which align with your personal values is very important, and the vice versa for organizations as well, because sometimes we get too focused on the skill sets, the experience, which is important. But if the value alignment is weak, one, you end up not having a long-term relationship, between the organization and the employee, and secondly, you try and be somebody else at work, and that I think for me that's usually the biggest drivers of stress. If I'm trying to be somebody I'm not.
Yeah. And especially being there for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours a day and just putting a mask which...
Yeah, and 8, 9, 10 hours physically and probably 12, 13 hours mentally.
Yeah. Let me ask you, I'll take you back to your McKinsey days, right? People don't leave McKinsey very quickly.
Correct.
You left in 5 years, which is less comparatively. Yes. And you did something which is again, people from McKinsey don't do something like that, right? You started Vani, social impact enterprise, right? I want to understand what was going on in your mind. Why did you choose that path?
See, looking back, I think McKinsey is probably the best starting career anyone can have. Getting to work with such smart peers, solving such challenging problems, being in the boardroom with very senior leaders to kind of observe them, make decisions, is something quite outstanding, which I really enjoyed early in my career. But after a few years, I did realize that the world I was getting exposed to in McKinsey, which was fantastic, was still a very, very small part of what the larger world is like. And I was kind of, protected / blind to a lot of other aspects of the world we are living in. Right, so that was one motivation to go out and figure out the rest of the world. Right, the second thing again, which I realized was, even though I had always thought about not being in the rat race and the corporate rat race and this kind of a vertical ladder that you're trying to climb, my environment was making me that person who was always, looking at that kind of life, right? And part of that realization came when I went to Amsterdam for a couple of years as part of my McKinsey stint. And one of the things that hits you when you are in a different society is how different the culture is there, right? And it's not about one or two people; just the society is built around a lot of how should I put it? Just the things they value in life is just different, right? So the amount of importance they would give to a career, how important is life outside their workplace, what they think of belonging to the community and the investment in community. And you observe it there and you see how ingrained it is in society as a whole. So it's not like there are a few exceptions around you. That's how society is built. And if somebody is the other way around, they are the exceptions. And still you have grown up a certain way, so you can't change who you are, right? You are still very much, looking, like for example, a very simple thing is, in India, we have this notion, all of us growing, where age is a very important comparison of, youngest partner in McKinsey. Or you will talk about batches, what is your batch doing right now? And you would suddenly realize nobody just thinks age. In Amsterdam, like people would take 2 year sabbaticals, somebody would go and do something else, come back, because somewhere there was no social conversation around age and how much you have grown vertically in your career. And that really hit me, saying, while I may think of myself as more evolved and trying to be more, balanced in life, I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm feeling great if I'm, promoted early, and I'm trying to look for the same metrics of success. So almost my decision to leave McKinsey happened when I was still finishing, and part of the reason to come back to India from Amsterdam was this clarity that I don't want to continue being a consultant, even though it's a fantastic career. So so that's where it started, and in fact, the genesis of Vani happened where my co-founder Aditeshwar, who's been my batchmate right from Lamartine College, and then in IIT Kanpur we were together, and he was doing his PhD in Canada. And while writing his PhD thesis, he came up with an idea and connected with me while we were in Amsterdam. So it's quite funny. Like, he was in Canada, I was in Amsterdam. We together wrote a paper to a foundation about an idea of how we want to use technology for something in India, and we got the grant. So now he's sitting in Canada, I'm sitting in Amsterdam. We've been granted money to do something in India. So that's how I came back to India. He came back from Canada, and we set up Vani together, right? So that was the motivation of doing Vani, which I think was probably some of the 3 most productive years of my life.
I think I really like the part where you said, right, there was a self-reflection, self-realization that probably life is not 100% professional.
Correct.
Right? And probably that happened when you went outside of India. I want you to also sort of help us understand, you've worked across various parts of the world, right? As well as various kinds of organization, be it an Indian startup, be it a company like Amazon India, which was just starting out in India, to working in Amsterdam itself, McKinsey itself, Vani, which was into social sector. I want to understand how people look at wellness across different countries or across different generations, so to say. If you could throw some light from your perspective.
Yeah, I think overall wellness, I think definitely society plays a huge role in what you value. For example, not just mentally, even if I take physical wellness, right? That itself was a big revelation to me when I went to Amsterdam. And in that case, even when I went to US and other countries, that physical well-being was a very important part of you assessing how well you're doing and how well your life is, because it was a very obvious thing that your physical well-being directly transforms into how long and how well you can enjoy life. And especially everyone had this aspiration of being independent as they grow older and older. So that was a very deliberate investment of time people would be doing in their physical well-being. And at that time, even in India, even that was not a very, it was almost all of us pretty much like, youth is to burn your, candle at both ends. You can always catch up later in life, whether it is sleep or whether it is, something else. There is time to invest in your physical well-being. It's not something you do every day, right? Again, that is something which has changed a lot today, where you have, a lot more focus on physical well-being in the last. I think that's really positive, right? But that wasn't there. Right now, if I go to mental well-being, I think there I would say, US and India were pretty similar, where it was really about, the mental well-being is more about being strong and being a person who is in control of your emotions and who can manage tough situations. And your mental well-being reflects on how productive you are at work. Right, so it's almost it was very twisted if now you look at it, but it was almost, if somebody is doing very well in their professional life, chances are they're strong mentally as well, because that's what's driving that. All right, and mental well-being is about purpose, it's about ambition, it's about not getting flustered, it's about maintaining composure, right? So those were the adjectives you would use if you talk about somebody who is mental well-being and mentally strong were almost synonym, right? When they are not. Right? But that was different in Europe, Amsterdam, right? Where mental well-being was also about how broad are your horizons, how much are you engaged in activities other than work, how high or low you are on stress, There was value on conversations, social conversations, which are not always about what's happening in your workplace, right, or what's happening in your social life, right? There were conversations on other topics, and people would spend time doing that. So that kind of a mental and social well-being, and Europe as a society was also very, very close-knit in terms of families. If everyone I worked at had such strong family ties going back to where they came from, their original cities, and they would be very tight. So those were the things you learned around how different societies value different things. And again, in India, the good part in India about mental well-being, I realized after going out, was the kind of joint family setups we have, where there is a lot of this within your own family, the extended family with cousins and stuff. You have peer groups to talk to. Chances are there is somebody who you are connected to. Chances, but no, not a guarantee. But that is even missing sometimes especially in US and Europe. They've been very deliberate to not miss that, realizing that having that connection is something very important. So that to me is across cultures, how we think of well-being is very different. And yeah, I spent a lot of my youth, I feel, not focusing enough on my health, not focusing enough on my mental well-being, because I felt I don't need it, and there was this bias, everything is okay, right? But you realize not only about if things are not okay, you need to invest in it. It's almost like saying only if I'm sick, I will exercise. It's the same thing, right? Yeah. You exercise so that you don't get sick, right? So that I think still on the mental well-being side, we haven't reached there yet. Still more reactionary and more responsive rather than a proactive. Crisis management rather than saying, every day I want to be healthy mentally and emotionally because I don't want to fall ill.
You beautifully spoke about how people individually look at well-being in different cultures, right? I want to also understand, are there different perspectives of well-being being looked at from various organizations, right? An Indian startup, a startup which is probably coming, you worked with Amazon India when it was a very small startup in India itself, right? To a company like a McKinsey, to a company like Vani. How do you think that the culture or the fabric of wellness was different?
Yeah, I think, part of it is obviously different organizations. Part of it is also evolution over time. So I think both impacted because, the earlier organizations I worked in kind of reflected the earlier thinking of society. But if I look at McKinsey, I think McKinsey, again, high talent density, small team. When I joined, it was a very small team in India. Not, too many consultants, maybe, a few dozen across India. So everyone knew each other, which was great. The good part was it's a very, very employee-friendly organization, McKinsey. So they are very proactively on the lookout for employee well-being, and they invest a lot in it. And so even things like, at that time, this thing was the first recognition that when you spend too much time on a laptop, and at that time you had BlackBerry phones, and you spend time on phones, there can be a repetitive strain injury, which could be on your wrist or a little bit on your back. And they immediately got a RSI consultant, anybody could reach out to make sure. And very generously, people would be given, sabbaticals of 3 months, 6 months to recover from them if because of work they picked it up, right? So that's on one side. But again, I think there were people you could reach out to, I think external agencies or global agencies, if you needed any kind of support on your mental well-being. But I never saw anyone reach out, right? It was again, one of those things which are there, and there's hardly any conversations. But one thing which was very striking for me, I think less on the org, was I know that all of us were working extremely hard. It was fairly stressful, right? And the biggest stress busters we had was we were working in small teams. And these teams used to spend pretty much 4-5 days a week together in a different city from their home city, away from their families. And that I realized first time how small groups help you, manage stress, right? And these are students that come together and go off, and it's not like they are close friends, but even then, that social fabric helped in a consulting structure, which was actually quite stressful in terms of work. If I move on to Vani, where again as a As a small organization, we actually did nothing proactive. We were a very, very small startup. But what Vani did for me in terms of realizing is no matter what the nature of the org in terms of people who are working there or the nature of clients and customers or outside stakeholders, the nature of stress is same. It's not linked to, again, as I said, how whether you're living in a city or you're living in a village, how much you're earning, what kind of social how socially privileged or underprivileged you are. The stress was everywhere, right? I would talk to in Delhi we are doing a project with the garbage pickers in Delhi, or we would work with some of the tribal people in Gondi area in Jharkhand, and at the base of it, every human goes through a very similar set of, once you adapt to your context, a lot of it is about the few people who matter to you, what have they said to you in the morning, in the evening, how have they reacted to you. That's what occupies human mind. So whenever we look at, mental well-being from a structural perspective, saying this cohort needs this help, we are anyways going wrong because it's so individual. It's so contextual to, individual's life. When I came to Amazon was again a company which was very, very focused on, employee overall well-being, and they had a lot of structures in place for people to reach out, and again, like Amazon is a very, very strong culture, and to me, among all the cultures I've worked in, probably the culture I feel closest to, including, and I'm trying to build some of that in my work. And for me, it worked beautifully. But it's also culture at times which can be stressful for people.
Why would you say you feel close about? What about that culture?
There are two, three things. I think some things which to me almost like aligned with my life philosophy, right? So for one very important thing is we have this concept in Amazon of controllable inputs. So the whole idea is that whatever you're doing, the outcome depends on a lot of variables, which are well outside your control. What you can control are a few variables. And that's what you should focus on. And obviously you observe the output to get a feedback on how well you're doing on the inputs. But you spend 90% of your time on the controllable inputs. So it, even though it's a kind of a online marketplace, it doesn't focus on sales so much. The discussion of sales is very minimal, because sales you can't influence, right? But you can focus what drives sales. That control, and that to me is almost a life philosophy in life as well, right? You can get very bogged down by the outcomes of your life, and you can't do it. And the truth is, while we try and give ourselves a lot of credit for achieving what we have and driving and making things happen, I personally feel a lot of it is about being in the right time, in the right place, some privileges of where you were born, and some advantages you had, or how things worked out. But a lot of big things happened not necessarily because you personally drove them, and you obviously influence it, but we kind of we give ourselves more credit than due for how much we influence our lives. So that's again, that focusing on controllable inputs, and it I think goes back to this Gita's philosophy of karma. That, you do your stuff, and the rest will take care of itself. Or if it doesn't, that's so be it. So that I think was almost this controllable input philosophy of Amazon. The second very important thing in Amazon which they focus on is this whole customer obsession. That again, which I talked about, it's from Amazon saying, and that came right from Jeff Bezos saying, a lot of times in the short term, you will see a conflict between what is right for customers versus what is, right for employees versus what is right for shareholders. But the moment you take a 20-25 year view, it's very easy to say that, just do what is right for customers and then make sure your employees are happy and you're doing right for them, and you will end up creating value. That's how organizations work. But you will not be able to put it on an Excel sheet when you do a 3 or 5 year business plan, right? So while it's a very analytical org, that overarching belief of, that after a point numbers don't matter and analytics will not give you the answer, just do the right thing for the customer. That was the second, which I felt was, very, and it was linked to this long-term approach to life, saying, there is a very different decision you make if you plan for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years versus 20 years. So that the moment you change the time frame of your decision, you will approach things differently. right? And I kind of apply it everywhere, even when I was talking about kids. If I worry about, my son is now, 12, going on 13, grade 7, you're already thinking 11, 12, what will happen in undergrad. Now, the decisions I make when I think about how to make sure he has the best undergrad opportunities is different from when I see how do I make sure next 25, 30 years he grows into a secure human being. And the two may conflict, right? But I think that's how human mind works, right? So that to me is the, second thing about Amazon, which has kind of aligns with me very well.
Yeah, I think so much learning for all of us. So building organization as well, right? Saying always keeping the long.
Right.
So you talked about Vani, you talked about Amazon, you talked about McKinsey. You also worked at Jabong,
Correct.
right? How was the culture there very different? Or was it the same?
Jabong, again, startup, very different in the sense there are a bunch of us young kids pretty much building an organization which was, kind of funded by a German group. And everyone is young and pretty much nobody had a lot of experience of doing what we were trying to do. I think the great part about that was everyone had a very strong identification with each other because we are all very similar in terms of age and a very common purpose of what we are trying to build. So that was holding us very strongly together, and there was very strong alignment of why we are doing this. So that why was so strong and so obvious that it didn't need to be reiterated a lot. Like today, when I'm building my current org, I do spend a lot of time on the why. Every time, why we are doing it, it's never about go and do this or let's do this, because I do feel that why is very important for human beings, right? Why are you doing something, no matter how small or big it is? In Jabong, that was very obvious. But at the same time, because we were very young and we really hadn't reflected on things like mental well-being, I think we were just blind to stresses around work and stuff. So I wouldn't even know, I think none of us would know at that time when I was there for a short time, if somebody would have been stressed. I mean, we had the HR, we had all those, but I think as leaders, we were not waking up every day and thinking, is the team happy? Are my people doing well? We were almost like, we are in it together. It's a common purpose. Let's, burn the midnight oil to get to where we want. And why should anybody have a challenge or a problem with that, right? So maybe everything was fine, but if it wasn't, I would have been a little blind to it at that time.
Now that you're running Aibo, right, and you have so much learning from your past experiences, be it college, be it in corporate,
Correct.
Different geographies, different culture. What is employee wellness for you?
I think for me, employee wellness is really what I said earlier is, are people able to bring their authentic self to the workplace? I think that truly is employee well-being, and that authentic self means that they have the space to come to the workplace with the emotions which they are feeling at that time. Not every day people have to be happy. So that is one of the other things. When I think of well-being, I think there is this whole notion that people should be happy all the time. I'm an introvert, right? So maybe a lot of times I'm quiet. I'm not stressed. I'm not unhappy, right? And I know it's a personality style, right? I would have friends and family who are more extroverted, and they would worry about me, saying, is everything okay? And that's really great that they're checking in. But I'm completely okay, right? But I'm just quiet, and I'm okay with that. So that's part of myself, right? But at the same way, if somebody is more talkative or wants to engage more, I think creating that space in a workplace for employees to be themselves, the way they want to be, is the true well-being, right? And I do feel a lot of times, a lot of focus is on keeping employees happy, which is not the same thing, because sometimes it translates into employee benefits, and we correlate, how great are the benefits an org gives to employee well-being, or are employees happy visibly. I think you should be happy in general, yes. So if you ask an employee, are you happy? In general, they should be happy. But it's not the same thing as you come to the floor of the office and everyone is smiling and laughing and giving high fives, and that's not a happy workplace, right? That I would be worried, because if somebody doesn't want to participate in that, they would be feeling stressed in that environment, right? So to me, that's employee well-being, and that to me is a responsibility of organizations to create that space, while acknowledging that the well-being of an individual is influenced by a lot of things, and your workplace is just one of them. So again, controllable inputs, right? You observe the outputs of how your employees are doing through mechanisms, but you focus on controllable inputs as an org, because sometimes what happens in some of these, you can do overreach, right? And you can get to intrude into places where you don't need to as an organization, because as an employee, there are a lot of things that impact my well-being. So that's what, and maybe that's again going back to my being introvert. I'm very conscious of somehow giving space to people, right? So, for example, in meetings, the way I would run my meetings are, I make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. Usually, I will go last, because I know once I say something, the chances are there might be group bias. So I would still make an effort to ask if I see somebody's not speaking and somebody's not speaking, I may ask them saying, do you have a point of view? But I should be completely comfortable if they don't. And I don't create an environment where participating in a meeting is an outcome in itself, and people feel stressed if a 2-hour meeting happened and they didn't speak anything. Because I've gone through this, right? At early, I would do that. I would go through a meeting, I would absorb everything. Whatever points I needed to put, somebody else had put, or they were discussed, or I didn't have a disagreement with what was being discussed. So I'm fine. But there would be, my friends, well-wishers, who would give me feedback saying, you should have spoken up more. You should have spoken up. Should have got noticed. Like, but why, right? And if I tried to do that, and early in my career, I would try to do it once or twice. And I realized that's not me, right? So that to me is employee well-being, which is, can we create the space for any kind of employee, whatever is the preferences in life, whatever mood they are in, they can bring it to office. So I'm okay if you are going through a personal struggle in life and you bring some of that, stress and frustration and sadness to the office place. That's the space I will create, rather than saying the moment you enter my doors, suddenly you have to start smiling and be happy, because we as a workplace are a happy workplace, right? So that's how I look at it.
I like the way for you, both the space that you want to create for your children and the way you want to create a space for your employees was actually the same. I want to create a psychological safe space where you feel comfortable to be who you are.
I think maybe that's my personal journey in life. So there's a bias towards it, but I just feel if I look at what I'm working towards, I think that's really what I keep feeling the more often, and the more places I can be fully myself, the more I seem to have grown as a person.
Absolutely. In fact, Mayank, we've been working in this area for almost a decade now.
Right.
So we've sort of designed a framework around, we call it well-being, right? Culture compass, to do the culture audit of an organization. And we keep saying this, it's not about what all benefits do you have, right? That's okay. Like a lot of organizations who do not understand employee wellness will come and say, is din ye kara do, logo ko dance kara do, sabko participate. But our core of employee wellness is going back to, is it psychological safe space, right? Are people feeling belonged? And there's an overall well-being of people, right? Need not be that everybody is like dancing on the floor or smiling on the floor, right? As long as they're comfortable who they are, you will see a lot of productivity and they will be belong to the organization and contributing towards that greater purpose, right? And that's exactly what I think you also beautifully spoke, both in your personal as well as for the professional world that you're trying to create, right? And thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you something also very personal, right? Can you share one very vulnerable moment of your life and how did it shape you?
I think it's hard to pick one moment, but I think one moment which I know when I was going through it, I didn't realize. But when I look back, I realize how often I go back to that moment. So clearly it had impact on me is, when my dad passed away. And it's fine. He was not well, and he went through some period of sickness, and he passed away. And we were kind of, it wasn't such a big surprise. So, it went fine. And I remember when I was just, at the cremation ground, and I was just standing there. One of the thoughts that came first time, I think, in my life at that time was on my own mortality, and it wasn't a fear, but it was a realization that, uh, you know, it will happen at some point, and therefore, somewhere, I feel I had been carrying a fear of death in a certain way that there is only so much time in life, and I have to. It doesn't come out as a fear that I'll die, but about how to make sure I make the most of the time I have, and that itself is a stress sometimes. Saying I want to make sure this happens, or I get to do this, or I make sure my kids have reached a certain place, and there are different ways you try and maximize your time in life. And that whole sense of maximizing time availability comes from this fear of death, that there is a limited time. And somehow in that moment, I think I at one felt very vulnerable that this can happen to me. And at the same time, I felt very relaxed, realizing that it will happen sometime, and I should stop this whole constant reflection on what more can I do. And there is this thing that people sometimes say, live every day is the last day of your life. I feel that's I don't believe in that. I think you just live just like it's another day, and then it will not be another day, and that's okay, right? So I think that was a very vulnerable moment, because again, it just made me at the same time realize there's so many things outside my control. So I can't live in this fear of what may happen. But at the same time, I should stop trying to always, make lists and bucket lists and these things I have to get done and stuff, because that's not something you again don't want to start controlling that.
You also spoke about you being an introvert, right? And that's why when I was trying to do a lot more research about you, I couldn't. And that's why I had to pick up the phone and be like, Mayank, aap hi bataiye apne bare mein aur, right? But do you think we have a disadvantage, especially in Indian context at the workplace?
See, I think Indian workplaces, which I think are a little bit are modeled on the capitalist workplaces of, say, US and UK, and we aspire to try and replicate some of that. There is a bias towards extroversion, which shows up in multiple places in terms of being vocal in meetings and vocal in groups, to networking as a very important enabler for great careers, to being out there even as leaders. There is a lot of feedback sometimes you give on leaders being out there, right? And out there, what does out there mean? It's just being you being more visible, and social media, if anything, has made extroversion even easier, where even if you are not physically with somebody, you can be extroverted in the post you're putting out on LinkedIn and elsewhere, right? So I think there is a positive bias towards extroversion, no doubt. Personally, I believe introversion doesn't give you any kind of disadvantage in your career. I have gone through it, but it can create stress, because the constant feedback from the environment is be more extroverted. I have sat through feedback to me about you can be more extroverted, you can speak up more, right? There are two different things. Again, sometimes the fair feedback could be that if you had something to say but you were not confident or shy, you should have spoken up. That's, I think, is a good feedback. But in general, that feedback of speaking up more is often given, and I've also observed at times others giving it in my team, and I would always intervene and say what does that mean. So I think that's, I think, introversion in terms of not necessarily a disadvantage, but I obviously believe, there's a book called Quiet, which I think wonderfully talks about the power of introverts and how important they are to workplaces, and by definition, a large part of the population is introverted, so they're always there. But again, by design, if you observe, if you measure what an org is going through by the what's being spoken, you will miss the introverts. So I think introversion is great, and as introverts we have our own ways of managing stress, right? That's the other thing, that how you manage stress is different, right? I know, my friends who are more extroverted may love talking to friends and unburdening themselves and sharing, right? Mine is very different, right? My two tools are, one is journaling. So I journal and I write to myself, and I think that's part of my introversion, partly part of my narcissism, that I just like talking to myself, but I find it easiest to untangle webs in my mind once I talk to myself and once I journal. So that has been a practice I've maintained for a long time, and even today that's my go-to place where I need some space to be myself, and journal is one thing which really helps me overcome stress, right? And I need that space. And in fact, if you keep asking me to share and tell me what's wrong, and even if something is wrong, it'll stress me out more, right? Because that's just who I am. And I think, and part of mental well-being for all of us, I feel, is accepting who we are, right? So for me to feel okay that I'm not okay sharing, even though multiple times some of my closest people may keep giving me feedback around sharing more, and maybe that's right, because there is my blind spots and I should that work on, but being true to myself. And I think if we really want to support people around us, acknowledging who they are and giving them that space to be, because while we talk about introverts, I've worked in teams and in groups, where I'm part of also, where in general the overall cohort is more introverted, and they're all fine doing their own work, and people come and they get it too, and they don't talk the whole day because everyone is very happy being productive by themselves, right? And they will go back home, and if you put in person who's more extroverted in that cohort, they will suddenly feel out of place. Like they'll be like, okay, let's take a 5-minute coffee break, let's do something. That's how they build their energy, and their energy will start going down 2-3 hours into the day because it's just so quiet, right? And if as a group we don't acknowledge that and expect them to be like, okay, why can't you do your work? Like, why are you distracting all of us? It's again not giving them the space to be who they are. So I think it worked both ways. That even anytime somebody is different in a cohort, how do we create space for them to be who they are, and at least be observant that people are different.
I think a lot of reflection, right? One, I think being comfortable in our own skin, right? Knowing who we are, giving that space to our family also so that they could
Correct.
be who they are. Giving that space to our people in the team or our employees as well to be who they are, because that's when people could be productive. That's beautifully said. And Mayank, I so relate to it. My partner Puneet, he's both my business partner and life partner. He's a big introvert, right? Which I am not. Earlier, our conversations, he would stop. He's so comfortable being silent, and that's okay, right? He's like, I'm thinking, why should I have to speak when I don't have my thoughts in place, right? But it was very discomforting. The way I've seen I would run meetings versus he would run meetings was very different, right? And I think it took me like 15 years to realize that, right? That the best is when people flourish is when you give them that space to be who they are, right? So that they put out their best. Thank you for sharing. Probably have one last question for you.
Sure.
Right? Like you kept talking about we are more modeling towards West, right? More modeling towards US. So in US, there is this thing of 9 hours, productive hours, and at least in my all experience of working there, reading is one thing, but also seeing that I know that they come in office, they leave in office, it's very productive.
Right.
And then they do other things, right? On the other hand, you have China, where we are talking about 9 hours or other 12 hours work day, 6 days a week, and that's how you achieve a country which becomes a developed country. What are your thoughts about those? Which is the path India should take?
I think, I think India already has its own path, because one of the things which, in general, you'll find in Indian workplaces in a good way. I think we are more social in workplaces where we don't go through very disciplined 9-10 hours of work, right? We do take breaks, and it's there are ups and downs through the day, which I think it works for most organizations, so that is great. Secondly, I don't think there's ever an answer in terms of number of hours. So I think, there's one thing which one of my leaders in Amazon had once said, this whole concept of work-life balance is a little, off, because, again, it is that there is work and there's rest of it, and there is a balance between the two, and it's more like work-life harmony, right? So for me, which has worked for me and all my orgs, I've seen it work for a lot of people, is, you give the flexibility for people to, again, work the way they want rather than having one org culture. So there are people whose lives are organized for various reasons. They have commitments and stuff that they work best when they can be predictable, saying, I'll come in at this time, I'll get my work done, and I'll be out of here because I have, my life organized like that, and that's what works for me. There are others who kind of play it by the day, right? Someday I'll come late, and I'll stay late, or someday I'll come early and I'll stay late, and someday I will do something else, and that's how their life is organized, and it fits in well to have that flexibility, right? So I think creating that, again, is a space for people to be flexible, and starting with a sense of trust. See, for me, it's always about, you start assuming that everyone is there to make a difference and work hard and contribute to the organization. And that's the starting point for anybody to turn up for work. And let them prove you wrong if that is happening. Rather than the other way around, where you start with a circle of mistrust and start imposing rules and penalties and restrictions around how people should behave. All right, and usually, at least so far, it has always worked where, in 100 people, maybe one or two, may not do the right thing in a very flexible environment. But you don't want to penalize the remaining 98, 99 because of those. So you always create rules for the 98, 99 in terms of work hours or flexibility, what is allowed, what is not. And that's a better way, and then figure out the 1, 2 and take care of them, rather than create rules to minimize or kind of protect the org from 1 or 2 who may not do the right things. And so far it works, at least for me. You trust people and they turn up and they respond in that trust with working even better and harder with more engagement and dedication. And the more you trust them, saying it, you get the work done the way you want.
Yeah, I like that way. Trust your people, give them a space where who they want to be, right? And the magic will happen.
Yeah, correct. And take a long term and let others prove you wrong. It will. It's not that it's a guarantee that nobody will. But I think whether it is life or personal life, professional, we often, what I've seen is maybe because sometimes it has obviously happened or you observed, we start with a sense of mistrust and we create these protection against not being hurt or betrayed or taken advantage of. And what happens is, in trying to protect ourselves from that, we create all of this lack of space for ourselves and for others, which is not worth the price for maybe a few times in life or a few times in the org. Somebody may take advantage. But that's a smaller cause than, living every day with those restrictions.
No, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation with you, Mayank.
I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great to see us talking about, our lives and our professional lives with the context of mental well-being, which I think, we often miss. A lot of the focus always is around what the business is doing and learnings related to professional and startups and stuff. So I'm very glad that we're having this conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.